When my sister, Emily, spotted me at the airport, she quirked an eyebrow and said, "I wish you'd come to my wedding." There was a reason for the sarcasm in her voice. Emily had claimed to be pregnant with my husband Bob's child and had taken him away from me. She must feel pretty high and mighty, being married to a pilot. Moreover, she had taken him from me whom she had quarreled while living together. That sense of superiority must be immense. To rub it in, she and Bob are planning a lavish wedding, and she's been boasting about moving abroad. Right now, she's waiting for her flight as she's about to go on a trip abroad, partly to scout for potential places to relocate. She's holding a large suitcase and a duffel bag, looking utterly ecstatic. In contrast, I arrived at the airport with minimal luggage, ready to head back home whenever. I'd come dressed lightly on purpose, ready to head back home once my business, which I'd informed her about over the phone, was done. She probably wanted to see me upset, but I wasn't just standing by in silence. I've known Bob much longer, so I know him way better. Feigning ignorance, I handed Emily an envelope with some crucial information, saying, "Here, you forgot this. My name is Jennifer Thompson. I'm from a coastal area, and I'm a 40-year-old housewife married to a pilot. We don't have any kids, so it's just the two of us. Bob is 47, and we met at a group date set up by friends. Back then, I had just moved to New York and was in my mid-20s, not really thinking of settling down. I used to attend these group dates just to expand my social circle. I thought the more men I met, the higher the chances of building a happy family. I've never been the type to fall in love at first sight. When dating, I'd prioritize personality over looks, but I did have a weakness for persistence. My first impression of Bob was that he was a ladies' man. He was good at lightening up the mood and seemed pretty easygoing, but sometimes I felt he had ulterior motives. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him after our first meeting, but life is full of surprises. After Bob kept pursuing me, I gave in. We went out for dinner and, before I knew it, we started dating. We've been married for over a decade now. Old friends of mine often say, "I never thought Jennifer would settle down with someone like Bob." Even I think they're right about it. True to my initial impression, Bob had been seeing other women before we got married. Whenever I confronted him about his affairs, he'd say, "You're the only one I love, Jennifer," deflecting my accusations. From the start, I wasn't that keen on dating, so I'd just ask him to stop cheating and let it go. However, our relationship was mostly enjoyable. He'd always take time off to celebrate our anniversaries and birthdays. After moving in together, he'd even do chores without being asked. I love cooking, so it wasn't a burden, and he would usually do the dishes. If not for the infidelity, I'd say I landed a great guy. So when he proposed, I felt the pros outweighed the cons and accepted. Of course, I made it clear that there'd be no more cheating after we tied the knot. Thanks to Bob's pilot salary, our wedding was quite grand. He got me all the expensive dresses I wanted, and the food and wedding cake were top-notch. I think we had a pretty luxurious wedding. My family was overjoyed, and I remember being so happy. My sister Emily kept saying, "Jen, I'm so jealous," looking at me in my glamorous dress, her own dreams of a grand wedding growing. Not many years after such a joyous wedding, Bob started cheating again. The downtown apartment we bought together was home to many residents. Because our unit was surrounded by nosy neighbors, I'd often hear gossip like, "I saw your husband with another woman." Every time I heard such rumors, I would line up air fresheners at the front door to get Bob to confess. Even when he admitted it, he never actually stopped cheating. I don't really expect him to change at this point, and oddly, I've never felt the urge to divorce him. I don't know if this is good or bad, but for now, I just keep saying please, don't cheat anymore. It's almost become a catchphrase. At the end of one summer, as I waved goodbye to Bob and was doing the laundry, the doorbell rang. It was too early for a delivery, so I was curious. When I checked the intercom, there stood a large suitcase, and my younger sister, Emily, was on the screen. "I'll be right there," I quickly said, and hurried to finish up the laundry. Even though Emily's my sister, I didn't want her to see the mess of my daily life. Emily and I have a significant age gap. I'm 40 and she's 27, a difference of 13 years. Our relationship feels more like an aunt and niece than actual siblings. After a short while, I finished laundry and opened the door to welcome Emily inside. "What brings you here, especially with such a large suitcase?" I had to leave my place after quitting my job. She continued that she had to leave the house since she couldn't pay rent after quitting her job. According to Emily, last October, she was transferred to a different department at work, and the female supervisor there treated her terribly. The supervisor was always cold only towards Emily, frequently scolding her for being slow even though she worked hard. Recently, they had stopped giving her tasks altogether. Emily tried to request a transfer, but the HR department wouldn't allow it, so she ended up resigning, she explained, slightly out of breath. I remembered how thrilled she was when she first got the job offer in New York. Now, after more than 4 years, she left due to office politics. Although I felt a bit of sympathy, I thought it was unusual for someone like Emily, who's usually favored by older colleagues, to experience this. Well, there are all kinds of people out there, I reasoned. I was so done with that company. I quit on my own terms. She left her job at the end of May, and since she had no savings, she couldn't afford her rent and was evicted. I'm pretty sure she earned slightly more than the average wage for someone in her 20s. I can't help but wonder how she managed to have no savings at all. Maybe she splurged on high-end cosmetics or designer brands. Ever since we were kids, she's had this impulsive streak, always acting without thinking things through. I'm honestly dumbfounded that she hasn't grown out of it. You really should start taking responsibility for your actions, I thought to myself. So, what are you gonna do now? If she has nowhere to live, she might need to return to our family home or look for a job that offers dormitory accommodation. There must be many things that needs to be done. She seemed unprepared and hadn't even started looking for a new job. As her older sister, I felt responsible for giving her advice. As I pondered the situation, Emily asked, "Can I stay here for a while?" Huh? The thought of living with my younger sister at this age never crossed my mind, and I was quite taken aback. Certainly, staying in this house would allow one to remain in the city without having to return to our family home. If she went back home, she'd face our parents' questions, and more than anything, she'd have to return to our hometown. If she wanted to continue her life in New York, staying away from where we grew up would be the most logical choice. However, it wasn't solely my decision to make. I had to wait for Bob to return. Well, let's discuss it with Bob first. Thanks. Honestly, I wished she would try to sort things out on her own for once. Despite my feelings, when Bob returned and heard Emily's story, he agreed without hesitation. Although I wasn't keen on the idea, I swallowed my words, feeling I had to accept it since Bob agreed. I decided to let Emily use the guest room meant for unexpected visitors and let her there. And thus, life for the three of us, myself, Bob, and Emily, began. Even though Emily was staying with us, she willingly helped with meals and house chores. However, oddly enough, she made no apparent efforts to find a new job. It's problematic if she thinks she can live with us indefinitely. With no savings of her own, it would mean that Bob and I would have to support her financially. I wonder if I'm being too harsh for wanting her to get on her feet sooner. Part of me wishes to go back to living with just Bob. Whenever I ask Emily, "Have you found a job yet?" she gives vague answers. Whenever Bob is away for work, my once free time starts feeling increasingly intruded by Emily's presence. Having someone else around during my me time feels more invasive than I'd imagined. There's always the sense of another person, the need for small talk, it's just not relaxing. In terms of chores, I can tolerate making more food since I love cooking, but for everything else, the added work for an extra person feels burdensome. Sometimes, when checking the guest room, I find her lazily watching videos online or munching on snacks. Her lazy attitude becomes more evident. She stopped helping around the house recently, and my patience is wearing thin. It will be a month since Emily started living with us, and her lack of effort in job hunting pushed me to the edge. I knocked on her door and confronted her with a stern tone, "When are you gonna start working?" Without turning away from the movie she was watching, Emily replied, "I know, okay," while stuffing another snack into her mouth. At that moment, something inside me snapped. "Why don't you at least show some effort?" Surprised by my outburst, Emily paused her movie and looked at me. "You need to straighten up. This isn't your house." Unable to hold back, I poured out all my frustrations that had built up over the month. After venting, I felt a bit guilty for not being more composed, but that feeling quickly vanished with Emily's next words. "I told you I know. You're the older sister, so you should be taking care of me." Wondering why I have to care for my grown-up sister, I tried to continue our argument, but I decided to take a deep breath instead. I had always known Emily to be selfish, but it seems she's gotten worse with age. Thinking there's no point talking to her now, I told her with a soft voice, "If you're just gonna laze around, you should leave," and then left the room. After that, Emily's lazy tendencies escalated. She started treating the guest room as her own, eating the snacks I bought without permission, leaving trash everywhere, and not cleaning up her clothes or other belongings. Every time I saw her lazy behavior, I'd tell her, "Enough's enough." But she'd just respond with, "Oh, come on," leading to countless arguments. I was getting fed up with this stressful living situation. Then, while at the supermarket, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Robers, who told me something unbelievable. "Hey, I saw your husband, Bob, and your sister, Emily, downtown last Sunday." I found it odd to hear that Emily went out, but as I waited for Mrs. Robers to continue, she leaned in closer and whispered, "They seemed really close." As I was wondering why someone would pay such close attention, Mrs. Robers spoke a shocking statement. "I think they might be involved in a romantic relationship." Initially, I thought to take the gossip-loving Mrs. Roberts' words with a grain of salt, but the confidence in her voice was unsettling. For the moment, I brushed it off with a smile, saying, "Thank you for letting me know," and parted ways with her. Regardless of Bob being a philanderer, he should know better than to get involved with his wife's sister. Although I wanted to take it with a grain of salt, the certainty in her voice bothered me. I just thanked her for the info and parted ways, thinking Bob would surely know better than to cross such a line. Some days later, while getting the mail, another neighbor, Mrs. Smith, mentioned Bob and Emily. "Yesterday, it seems that your husband and your sister went for a drive. They seem to get along really well." Mrs. Smith, unlike Mrs. Robers, didn't seem interested in probing into a romantic relationship between them but rather wanted to discuss the warmth of family ties. She wore a gentle smile on her face. However, yesterday, I was out meeting a friend and Bob was typically at work, so Emily should have been home alone. But Mrs. Smith must have recognized Bob's car and probably did witness them together. I thanked Mrs. Smith briefly and quickly returned to my room. I called the two of them to the living room, took a deep breath, and calmly asked, "Did you two go out together yesterday?" Bob, without showing any sign of embarrassment, simply responded, "Yeah, we did. I took Emily to the job center." "You wanted Jennifer to start working soon, didn't you?" Following Bob's comment, Emily added in a matching tone, "Yeah, he just gave me a ride." I decided not to press the issue further and brought up what Mrs. Roberts had mentioned. "By the way, a neighbor mentioned you two seem quite close, is that so?" Hearing that, Bob, crossing his arms, replied, "What's that about?" "She's my wife's sister, of course I'd be kind to her." He then showed a somewhat annoyed attitude and asked, "Is that all?" before retreating to his own room. Casting a quick glance towards Emily, she awkwardly turned her face away and headed back to her guest room. I felt something was off, but I couldn't gather any further information from them. Days went by and I had to endure the lazy attitude of Emily, who showed no interest in finding a job and seemed too comfortable in our home. Getting tired of arguing with her and urging her to work, I kept our conversations minimal and tried not to interact much. I wonder if everything seemed calm on the surface. After about 2 years, while I was preparing to go shopping in my room, Emily suddenly called me to the living room. She looked somewhat proud, and I thought she was about to announce her new job. But instead, she had me sit on the sofa and dropped the bombshell, "I'm pregnant." Confused, I asked, "Pregnant? What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm carrying Bob's child." The shock was equivalent to a slap on the face. I recalled what Mrs. Roberts had said 2 years ago. I couldn't believe my sister and my husband had an affair. Seeing my disturbed face, a smug Emily added, "Bob said he'll marry me." She then looked down on me triumphantly and declared, "Bob is mine." That evening, when Bob returned, I demanded an explanation. He showed sincere apology and expressed his desire to raise the child. A part of me wished for a denial, but Bob's response confirmed the bitter truth, and I struggled to accept it. That night, I couldn't stop pondering our next steps. But feeling that tomorrow's me might have an answer, I decided to sleep early. The next day, waking up early, I started browsing on my computer. I researched the possible settlement I could claim in case of divorce due to their betrayal, and about the apartment we had purchased together. The mere idea of him being with another woman was intolerable, let alone getting my sister pregnant. Divorce seemed the only option, and I was determined. From my research, it appeared that our district accepted digital divorce transaction. So, I downloaded the form on my phone and went to a local store to print it out. As I was leaving, I felt Emily's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. After getting my errand done and I locked myself in my room, I started filling out divorce papers. Considering he expressed the desire to raise the child, it was clear he wanted a divorce. A court case seemed unnecessary, a simple mutual agreement would do. I listed down my terms and, holding the completed divorce papers, knocked on Bob's door. Upon recognizing me, he opened the door immediately. He agreed to the divorce, paying a one-time settlement of $30,000, and to sell the apartment we had bought together. While I wondered how he and Emily planned to support themselves, I found it absurd to sympathize with the two betrayers. I stuck to my terms and made sure they paid in full. Once the apartment sale was over, we started our separate lives. However, it wasn't long before I received a snarky call from Emily. "We're gonna have a wedding even more extravagant than what you had, just the two of us." I couldn't care less, but I still respond, "Well, good for you. We're even planning to move abroad." Emily says this over the phone, her voice brimming with excitement. She must feel pretty good about taking him away from me. They are about to go on a trip abroad, partly to scout for potential places to relocate. I can't help but wonder what Emily knows about Bob, her fiancé. Especially since he was actually laid off 2 months before Emily announced her pregnancy. Bob and I had some savings at the time, so I didn't feel the need to tell Emily. And it seems that Bob probably hadn't told her either. The reason for his termination? An affair. He was caught red-handed with a married flight attendant, and he had to pay a hefty settlement to her husband. On top of that, he's also paying me settlement, so I'm pretty sure his savings are nearly depleted. Life is unpredictable, and my decision to let things slide may just come back to haunt Emily and Bob. Emily, in her ignorance, keeps gloating on the phone. When she tells me they're leaving for a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, I say, "All right, I'll drop off some luggage you left behind," and hang up. On the day of their departure, I make my way to the airport, looking for Emily. I find her sitting alone in front of an airport cafe. As soon as she sees me, she says, "Jennifer, why didn't you come to my wedding?" Her voice tinged with spite. Ignoring her, I get straight to the point. "Here, this is from Bob." I hand her an envelope. Emily's face turns ashen as she reads the contents. "Your husband Bob is not just out of a job as a pilot, he's completely unemployed." Visibly shaking, she yells, "Stop lying." But I calmly reply, "He's probably nearly broke by now." After explaining everything to her, she screams, "I can't believe this," and storms off, drawing cold stares from the people around her. I really thought happiness could come easily, I mumble to myself, feeling somewhat relieved. I left the airport and headed to my small restaurant in a city far removed from New York. After that, I used the settlement and the proceeds from selling the house to start a small diner in a town far from the city, capitalizing on my passion for cooking. Although I can't prepare gourmet dishes, my traditional American comfort food has been well received by the locals. On the other hand, Emily and Bob seem to be struggling quite a bit. Emily returned to our parents' home for childbirth, seeking help. However, she didn't raise the child and left the child at her parents' home, and now, her whereabouts are unknown. It sounds like she can't bear living with our parents nagging since they heard her situation in detail from me. Bob, denied access by my parents and unable to find work, still insists on paying child support. Whether she's lost touch with reality or genuinely cares about the child, her future seems fraught with challenges. It's uncertain if they're still together, but Bob hasn't yet met the child my parents are raising. Ironically, Bob had divorced me because he wanted kids. I've decided to steer clear of irresponsible people like them. I'm happy with my current life, and I plan to keep working hard to make my small restaurant a beloved part of the community.